Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Strong Female Athlete podcast. Here today, I have my husband, Casey, who we've been trying to get on the podcast for a while now. He's been bugging me.
I've been bugging you.
Yeah. No, I've wanted you on because we've had some good conversations.
I'm thankful to be on. Happy to join.
I'm excited. And it's really cool to have you on because you have a good perspective with baseball and everything that you're doing in terms of reducing Tommy John injuries. And I've learned a lot from you.
I can give my background if you'd like.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be great.
I guess I'll introduce myself. My name's Casey. I am Erica's husband, and I'm the owner of Kinetic Pro Performance in Tampa, Florida. I work with baseball pitchers specifically with Kinetic Pro. We've talked about doing this. I've watched your podcast grow. I'm very proud of her and watched her podcast grow. And we both share a unique perspective on youth athletes and on full-time athletes that I train, from professionals to college players, etc. And yeah, thankful to be on today. And Eric and I have great conversations every morning at 5 a.m. over coffee. So I think this is maybe a peek into some of you who are wondering what we talk about on a regular basis. This is a peek into our 5 a.m. chats about the strength conditioning world and just the youth sports industry space. And both of us have been uniquely able to have very great playing careers. Mine is a baseball pitcher, and obviously Eric was a soccer player. So I think we both share unique perspectives. And yeah, I'm excited to chat with Erica today about this. So I know you have some questions. Do you want to just dive into it, or do we want to talk about us more? I think we should just dive into it.
I don't know. I did want to mention that when we met on our first date, I was excited that you were also in this industry because I had someone to talk to about things we're passionate about, and we're on the same schedule. And I know that was a big one for you. You want to tell everyone what you said to me after the first date?
Yeah. So the story goes that both of us were, obviously, Erica just moved to Tampa, and she was getting her business set up here. And she cared a lot about her athletes back in Baltimore and was trying to get her roots down. And I, at the time, was a few years into a growing small business with KP. And I felt that I didn't have a ton of time to date at the time. And so I want to be very honest and upfront that KP was taking a lot of my time. And I was very passionate about what I did. And so after our first date, I closed our first date, not in the most romantic way possible. I closed our first date by saying, I really like to spend time with you and talk more about things. But at the moment that I'm in my life, the phase I'm in my life, I kind of only have one day a week that I can really get together and hang out. And surprisingly, Erica's response was, that sounds great. So I think that was a huge plus, and she understood what I realized she understood what I did, and that she was doing something very similar. So somebody said to me the other day that you need to be with somebody that shares the same passion, or at least can share your passion. So I think we checked that box together on that front, which is cool. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and we did hang out one time a week for a couple months.
For a long time.
And then it got to a point where it's like, oh, I kind of want to see this person more than on Sundays.
Yeah.
So then I started spending more time here at the house, and you driving all the way to my apartment, which was like an hour away in traffic.
Yeah.
And I mean, even today, now that we're married, we do spend a lot of time together since we live together, obviously, but our day is still really only Sundays.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of owning a business and being in sports.
Right.
And, we were talking earlier today that if you want to be in sports, you have to make a lot of sacrifices if you want to make it and be impactful and do well. So I think we still navigate that a little bit, but yeah, I think it's good.
I think you have two sides of it, right? From a player's perspective, I don't think a lot of players understand exactly what their coaches go through to make things happen, even from volunteer coaches at Little League level or at the youth soccer level. Like a lot of players don't realize how much effort that coach may have a full-time job working 9 to 5 and then or maybe more, right? And then they're planning soccer practice schedules while they're maybe in bed the night before trying to plan something out. And I also think that's important to remember for parents too, right? Like we push our kids to be great at things and we want kids to excel, but oftentimes we forget that even in a paid position for some of these youth programs, like it's important to remember why people are in it in the first place and not to forget that it's about the kids. And and then the other side of it is if you're working in sport and you're trying to do something at a high level, this isn't I always talk about golf and how like golf can be played from ages 2 to 92, right? 102 for sure. And so there's money to be made in golf, and there's a lot bigger population that plays golf and enjoys golf recreationally. Soccer and baseball specifically, and some of these other sports that are more not recreational friendly. You're going to talk about tight money in the industry, and so you're having to really hustle and be the best at what you do. And shout out to all the spouses that are out there that support coaches and people that are working in the industry, in the sports industry, trying to make it happen, because it takes somebody special, whether you're a player getting to the highest level, whether that be soccer or baseball, or other sport, or you're a coach and you're trying to find your way there as well. Like I think, you and I have been through it, right? Like
Oh yeah.
it's a grind, and you have to have somebody special by your side to support you through it. So I know I've tried to support Erica, and Erica's supported me. Probably a lot of Erica supporting me over my late days and long nights, but
A lot of long nights. Casey gets his like biggest energy bursts after 8 p.m. and that's when I go to bed. So we're not on the same schedule. But yeah, I have trouble understanding like when someone has a spouse who coaches and the other doesn't. The person who doesn't, it's like I don't know how they understand, because it's a lot. Like there's even some days where it's like, wow, like we are working really long hours, and I don't really believe in work-life balance. I think it's this thing everyone sees online with like the Tony Robbins of the world, and they think it exists, but I think it becomes more of like a work-life integration, where you just make it a part of what you do because you're so passionate about it, and you're passionate about the problems you're trying to solve with baseball, and that inspires me. And especially from an injury reduction standpoint, I've learned a lot from what you've built and just your perspective on what's causing injuries. And I think not just the soccer world, but all female athlete sports could learn from what you're doing, because no one has figured it out in the soccer world. I would even say at the highest levels, they haven't figured this out. So I guess, what's your background? What was the level you made it to? And what ended your career?
Yeah. So I played baseball professionally with the LA Dodgers. I didn't go very far. I was just in the minor league system. Blew up my rotator cuff my first year in. As a high school senior, backing up a little bit, I was at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. I was one of the top ranked players in the country, supposed to be a first round draft pick, and ended up missing the draft by about 60 days of Tommy John surgery. So those two injuries specifically were massive impacts on my trajectory and where I was going to be in the future. Tommy John specifically led me to kind of chasing an understanding as a player, starting to learn why that happened to me potentially. And then the rotator cuff, I realized I was getting a little old for my chance in baseball. And it kind of spurred me into sports science and learning about more of the job side of things. And so when I got done playing, I was rehabbing back at IMG again. And I just had a lot of questions that I wanted answered. So being resourceful, there was a biomechanics lab on campus at the time called Modus. And I got to work sort of on my own time as sort of a pseudo intern for Modus at the time under specifically at the time Ben Hansen, who's now the CTO of the Mets. Ben was the CTO of Modus at the time. And to your point of sort of learning about injuries and potentially the causations of them, I felt like I was the strongest I had ever been at the end of my career. And I felt like I had the best mechanics I had ever had at the end of my career. And everybody always said, you got to have great mechanics and you got to be really strong. And it was just those two things in baseball constantly. But it really bugged me when I finished playing that when I felt I was at my best in those two categories, I still got hurt. And so I went to Ben, the CTO at Modus at the time, and I was just in the lab and I asked Ben, I said, uh, Ben, why is it that I got hurt when I was my strongest and when I had my best mechanics? And Ben goes, well, there's a whole nother category that you're not considering. And Ben said, have you ever thought about workload management, how much you do? It was like a light bulb went off because I had never really thought about how much I was doing as a player or how much I was throwing specifically. At the time, Modus was building a little sensor as a product that would track how much throwing you do. Much like you see today from various companies in the soccer realm, and I've talked a lot about them, wearable technology you put on your shoes or you wear on your chest or different places, etc. And so I started really thinking about that, started studying workload management. Flash forward to 2020 and 2019, I built the game's first dynamic throwing model, built software of our own, started building our own sensor. Modus got bought by another company. And so I started building our own sensor. And so today we work with Wake Forest. We've worked with Michigan, Iowa. I work with, right now I have 32 professional athletes in-house at KP, various professional players like Nick Martinez at the big league level. Nick's awesome.
He's the best. He's so compliant.
It's great. And so now I go around and I talk a lot about sort of integrations of workload management. Everybody talks about workload as this sort of restrictive thing. And reality is it's not restrictive. Workload management should be looked at as not like when you should sit the bench. Workload management should be looked at as how do I build up enough to handle the thing that I want to handle. And so I'll explain it from a baseball perspective, like the mechanics versus like workload injury argument discussion.
Or you could give the marathon example.
I'll give the marathon.
That's a good one for everyone.
Okay, great. So let's define workload then real quick and talk about that. Then I'll come back to the discussion of where I think it fits in a bit. But I always say that workload is intuitive. And so workload shouldn't be restrictive. It should be empowering, but it should also be intuitive. And everybody knows what workload is, workload management, that term. They may not understand the depth of that term or the calculations the sensor provides or something like that, but everybody intuitively understands it. And so I'll use Erica as the example because she's been through this 100 times, but I'll ask you the questions I typically ask other people,
okay.
Which is, Erica, are you ready to run a marathon today?
No, and I never want to. You know me, I'm a sprinter.
Right. So most people would say no. Most people
yeah.
would say that they're not going to run a marathon. And so then my next follow-up question would be, how do you know you're not built up enough to run a marathon?
Just haven't run enough miles.
Great. You haven't trained, right? So most people would say, no, I'm not built up to run a marathon. I'm not ready to run a marathon today. I haven't built up or haven't trained for it. Okay. So the next question I'll ask then is, if I gave you 8 months, you're in great shape.
I can do that.
You don't run right now, but in 8 months, you think you could run a marathon?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So,
and is it 26 miles?
26.2 miles.
Okay. Yeah.
So 8 months, you say you can build up for it. How about 2 months?
No.
So
definitely not.
Again, most people say I can't build up for 26 miles in 2 months. I can build up potentially in about 8 months. And I go, well, how do you know it's between 2 and 8? Interesting question, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, great. So now let's go to the discussion of actually programming. And we're going to start your training today. And so most people, this is where they'd fall off the wagon. They go, oh, I don't know. I'm not capable of programming. I don't know the right way to program or design a running program or anything like that. But I go, you have instinctive awareness of what it would be to have a bad program versus a good program. Mm-hmm. So I say, okay, week 1, right? Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're going to run a half mile on Monday, a half mile on Wednesday, and a half mile on Friday. You're in pretty good shape. Is that a good place to start?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So that's our week 1. Now let's go to week 2. I'm going to now have you go. Remember, week 1 was half mile on Monday, half mile on Wednesday, half mile on Friday. That was our training plan, right? Now, week 2 of our training plan, we're going to go 10 miles on Monday, 10 miles on Wednesday, 10 miles on Friday. Is that a good plan? Why not?
It's just too much too soon.
Great.
I'd probably get really sore or hurt.
Right. So workload management, when we think about it, right, I say it's intuitive because all of us would have answered those questions relatively the same. I can ask 13-year-olds, I could ask, 60-year-olds who have never run, never trained for anything in their life, and everybody's going to say pretty much the same thing. So when we think about what is workload really comes down to 2 categories. Make sure you're built up enough to handle the competition or the load you're going to face, right? So being prepared for season. In baseball specifically, we see in the MLB, for example, that April is the highest incident rate of injury, meaning that guys train all off season. They get to the first month of season, which is April, and we see the highest rate of injuries in April. Every month after that, it declines. There's actually a really great study that just came out by the MLB a couple days ago that shows this is still the trend. And I bet you if you look at soccer, I haven't ever looked into this. We can do it later.
It's very similar.
I would bet you it's very similar.
At the pro and youth level. And especially after COVID, when everyone came back.
Yeah.
ACLs in the women's game and then the hamstrings in the men's game. So.
And COVID exposed this. Like it was a perfect in baseball as well. As a study about the injuries in baseball post-COVID came out in 2021. And I guarantee you it's the same across all sports. So you don't have to worry about just like, is it men's baseball, MLB? No, this is pretty universally accepted. When load is greater than tissue tolerance, injury occurs. Meaning when what I'm doing in the beginning of my season, when I'm not built up for it, if that load exceeds tissue tolerance, we're going to have an injury occur. That's ACLs, that's UCLs, that's shoulders, that's whatever you want to name. So think about workload management. Again, it's intuitive. The question becomes, how do you get more into the objective? How do you measure? You talk about Nick being compliant, for example. And I think this is a problem that all sports face, but I don't think it's a philosophy or a workload problem. Like workload doesn't work. I think it's a technology problem, and it's a scalable technology problem. So I hear it from you too. Players don't yet know how to value this, but it's something that we need to start talking about at a much broader scale.
Yeah, well, I think people have always looked at the wrong things. Like in baseball, it's mechanics. And soccer too, especially in the female athlete space, it's always, we're blaming female anatomy and wide hips and knee valgus on injuries, and no one's thinking about the workload that these girls are doing with year-round sports and not having periods of deload, then building back up again and becoming stronger and more athletic and exposed to high-speed running and getting ready for preseason. It's just everyone's just kind of winging the workload. And it's hard because you have the team coaches and the private sector performance coaches like me. And it's like, how much control can a private sector coach actually have? Yeah. And then you have the issue of compliance with the athletes always turning on their sensor and using the technology and not missing a session. And with female sports like soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, basketball, they're doing separate skill sessions, then practice, then other trainings, and they're going to forget to turn that GPS on.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, but I think people need to start having these conversations and stop blaming, it's female anatomy, because we can't control the structure of a girl's hips. If we wanted to, they would have to undergo like a very intense surgery to change their body structure, which you don't want to do. And then people are also blaming menstrual cycles. Well, female menstrual cycles shouldn't go away because they're a sign of health in female athletes. So we can't change that. So what can we change? And that's their workload, leaning into good recovery, having deload weeks or off days, still working on strength. Mechanics, I'm not as convinced anymore on the mechanics argument because we've had this discussion before. We see people jogging in our neighborhood with terrible mechanics. I see people running on Bayshore in downtown Tampa with knee valgus, and they're running on their toes and they're jogging miles on end, but they're not hurt.
Yeah.
Like they're running. So if, everyone's running around with bad mechanics, why aren't they hurt?
Yeah, I think the easy way to explain that, sort of the way I like to explain it to people, we get this question from kids a lot because they've been told from a very young age that their mechanics are why they're getting hurt, or their mechanics are. And it's not to retract. I always talk about it as like a triangle, right? You have strength, you have mechanics, and you have workload, and you look at all three of those things. They all three play their own factor. So if I have an athlete who's extremely weak, regardless of if I have an athlete who's extremely weak with really bad mechanics and a really high workload, that's a recipe for disaster. And so when you start to look at all those boxes, you can start to check them. Bad mechanics, I put mechanics down the bottom. Strength second, workload first. And the reason why I do that is because if you think about, I'm going to use it from a baseball perspective. You can apply this to knee valgus and the same. I'm not well studied on the knees, but from an elbow perspective, I can definitely talk educationally. But if an athlete has quote unquote high stress or bad mechanics, what that means is that they're putting higher torque on their medial elbow. So when they throw, their arm is extending earlier, and they're putting more stress on that inner elbow.
It's the same thing with the knee. So when they have the knee valgus, there's more torque on the ACL joint
Sure.
or the meniscus.
So when you look at that, you say, okay, well, how much load is being applied, and when that load is being applied to that athlete in that pattern, that is a higher stress than maybe somebody who has cleaner mechanics. When you would have somebody throw, for example, if they throw the ball and their arm doesn't extend, I'm going to keep it as simple as I can, their arm doesn't extend as early, that would mean that typically it's a lower torque. Now, the other piece of that is how fast that athlete is throwing. So inter-athlete velocity is the also increases the torque. So same thing, you talk about an athlete who's cutting versus an athlete who's sprinting full speed, that intensity applies more force to the knee or the ACL in this case, and talking about the arm for throwing, it's the UCL. And so when we start to look at how do we mitigate that? Well, one single incident of a sprint, so one step, is not what typically causes the injury. It's the repeated incident over and over and over and over and over. And so what you would say is somebody who goes out and plays, I'm going to try to do this from a running perspective with the knee. Somebody who goes out and runs, they have X amount of high intensity steps or cuts in the day. Throwing, it's they have X amount of high intensity throws in the day. They have X amount of throws in the day that would equate to when their body is potentially higher than I don't want to say higher than, it's their body's not in a ready state anymore. They're in a fatigue state. If their body gets into a fatigue state, they're more likely to get injured. In baseball, it's a 36 times greater likelihood that you're injured when you're throwing in a fatigue state. And so if you think about it, and again, trying to keep this simple, but if you think about it as basically you're diminishing your resources in your body over time by doing the activity more and more and more, the more high stress that your body, the more high stress pattern that your body's creating in terms of the mechanic, means the more resource you're depleting over time. And so the question becomes, how much time do I have on the field that day? Well, if I pulled a girl or a baseball pitcher off the field early, could I have avoided that injury? That's where most people start to think about workload as a restrictive manner. But if I plan for that ahead of time, and I know I can build this athlete up, I build that tissue tolerance over time, now we can keep the athlete on the field longer because they're not going to be in a fatigue state as early. So I know it's a little complex, but this give and take between bad mechanics versus workload discussion, the easy way to think about it is if I have bad mechanics and I don't throw as hard, right? We'll talk about throwing again. If I have bad mechanics and I don't throw as hard, that could still be high stress. If I have great mechanics, but I throw really hard, that's still really high stress. Yeah. Both of those scenarios have to be managed. When we start talking about some of the very specific, the fine muscular and fine motor patterns of like certain muscles, you could make a case for certain injuries occurring, maybe because of that repetitiveness. But majority of our athletes, when we start talking about injuries, they're overuse or they're undertraining injuries, meaning that in that day they're being overused or they're undertrained going into the load, which and then causes overtraining. But if we just looked at managing the load for an individual athlete, we could start to better understand on a larger scale really how we enforce not necessarily compliance, but how we enforce development of athletes in the off seasons to be ready for a season. So long-winded answer to say workload, in my opinion, is more valuable when we start talking about the injury issues that we see for female youth athletes and for, I'm not an expert in that space, but for specifically pitchers in my case, workload management on that front is definitely something that we need to be more attentive to and consider greater.
Yeah, I agree. And I even saw it, like my injury story is similar to yours. Like I felt I had a lot of strength and my sprinting and cutting mechanics were, I guess, quote unquote, perfect,
They're still
whatever.
perfect.
Yeah, whatever that means. Well, that's the other thing. It's like, what is perfect mechanics? And when it comes to sprinting, I mean, yeah, there's some like big rock things we're looking at. We don't want girls to be toe runners because that puts more stress on the patellar tendon and the knee, or we don't want them to be heel striking because that can put stress on the hamstring and cause hamstring strain. So like there's some big rock things, but for people to get into like the fine details of you need to be at like 10.9 degrees like heel strike, like I I just feel like you can't really achieve that, like, and then when an athlete's in a game running full speed, chasing after a ball or running down the field with a lacrosse stick, they're not thinking about perfect mechanics. They're just trying to get the ball in the goal or
Well, an
so
environment in that case dictates change, right? So in terms of if you've got two defenders that are attacking and you're the one with the ball, you're in trouble. I'm terrible with soccer terminology, so I apologize if that was horrible.
You've been to some of my games though.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm learning.
You've watched some games too.
I have watched a few games.
Which you didn't really like.
It's just slow. It's
the
lot,
men's game.
There's a lot of flopping.
You don't like the
I don't like the flopping.
You don't like the men's game.
I was raised in a different place.
The women's game is exciting though.
Women's game's great. I do like that.
Yeah, they get right up.
Yeah, there's no flopping.
Yeah.
But and there's no rhyme or reason for the foul calls, which is a whole other problem for me. Anyways, when you talk about the environment specifically, there's a lot of undefined variables for athletes, and you can't have in baseball. We talk about having repeatable mechanics in pitching, and when you actually look at so there's a website. This is getting really nerdy. There's a website called Statcast where you can look at all the MLB data, and so they have these big camera systems in the MLB stadiums that you can look at biomechanics data and release points and movement of pitches and the physics of all of the stuff. And basically what you see is when we say repeatable mechanics, people use that term all the time, but nobody defines it. And so you have some pitchers that release the ball very forward early in the game, but as they get tired or fatigued, they start to release the ball with more of an upright posture, or certain pitches, curveballs or changeups, they throw from a higher slot or a lower slot. And so you might train perfect repeatable mechanics, but we actually don't have a definitive understanding of what perfect or repeatable mechanics are. So same with running is, again, you talk about terrain, you talk about cleats, you talk about ball size, you talk about you playing up. If you're a younger athlete, you playing up with older players that are more physical, and you may not have that strength. Those are all outside factors that you can't account for and are going to change your mechanics. Baseball pitching, we have a very isolated, you create the movement, but the mound and the cleats and the weather and all of these things still change the outcome of what's actually happening. So we say repeatable, we say have good mechanics, but we're very far from, let's not even talk about anatomy, we're very far from understanding what good mechanics are and the actual stresses. In some cases, we actually don't understand how to train athletes for certain stressors or stresses in game, if that makes sense.
So when you were younger, did you work on your mechanics? Did you have a pitching coach? Because I get questions all the time. Should my female athlete have a running mechanics coach at age 9? And people think I'm crazy when I say, no, she just needs to get outside and get a variety of movements so that she can get balance, develop coordination, develop spatial awareness.
Yeah.
And so she can express that speed in a sports setting. And she also needs to keep it fun at that age.
Right.
So you made it to the Division 1 level, the pro level. Did you work on mechanics when you were young?
My dad sent me for camps all the time to different places. He had me with like very short stint, like exposures to pretty high level coaches when I was young from a pitching standpoint. But when I look back at like what made me quote unquote throw hard, I think in my world today, like, you know, a lot of parents and players attribute their child's successes to facilities or to private sector coaches, and it's like, you know, it's like rubbing the magic bottle and trying to get the genie to come out, right? It's like pre-game, like, hey, you got a big tournament this week. Let's go to our you know sprint coach this week and do a quick session because last game
A quick brush up session
there
is
you
what I
go.
get.
Right, right. Just a quick little touch up. Make sure that we, you know, get you ready to go. And it makes you feel like you're doing something.
It's placebo effect, I
A
think. If they
hundred
have a
percent.
good game, it's placebo.
It's a lucky charm. Like
Yeah.
it's saying like, well, we did that last time and you had a great game, so let's do it again.
It
And
was
it's
all the
like,
coach.
yeah, you're missing the whole point of like the long-term effects of that development. So I would tell you like I had some pitching coaches along the way. Nobody that was like I was working with weekly. Nobody I was working with even monthly. Like I would occasionally go to camps, and my thing when I went to those camps, I distinctly remember as a kid, I'd always at those camps, good, bad, and different, but always at those camps, I would try to impress the coaches that were there with how hard I could throw because I knew I could throw harder than the other kids that were around me. And my whole life, there was never a moment where I looked back and was like, man, like number one, I always threw harder than all the guys around me, and number two, I was always interested in how hard or how far I could throw the ball. And so when I was a kid growing up, let's say I was 5, 6, 7 years old. You know, my adult's gonna come join us. It looks like maybe.
She's ready for this discussion. No, she's repositioning. Okay.
When I was 5, 6 years old, my best friend and I used to stand in his backyard over the summers, and we'd play catch, and he was a catcher. So he was the catcher, I was the pitcher. We'd do that in little league and travel baseball, etc. And we played this game. It's burnout that everybody talks about now, but back then we used to stand like 40 feet from each other and we would try to hit each other in the chest with the baseball and try to hurt. We were just little kids, right? So
It's free and it's brilliant.
we would try to throw it as hard as we could and make each other miss the ball. And then we played this game with a little sponge ball where we would, you know, throw the sponge ball thing as hard as we could at each other. We had a oar, like a paddle, and we'd try to hit it.
Oh
And
wow.
we would do that for hours and hours and hours. Now, overuse, maybe stupid, probably not the safest thing to have done, all of those things. But, you know, at the end of the day, I did that all the time, and I loved baseball. When I was a kid, I also used to come home from school and I'd stand on one side of the house. My parents had this kitchen that was, you know, pretty big ceiling, and so that part of the house would sit way up, and I would try to throw the balls high and far as I could. And I'd sprint around the house. We had this little hillside, sprint around the house as fast as I could, and then I would just dive and try to catch the ball. And so you talk about developing skills, like and the higher and further I could throw the ball, the more time it gave me to get to the other side of the house. So I had to throw it as hard and high as I could. My dad would sit on his recliner and clap for me when I, you know, laid out and caught it or whatever. Hey, good catch, great job. And I became a great outfielder, and I became a great pitcher. And most of those skills, I would tell you, were developed just in the backyard, just being creative, just having fun with the game of baseball, not in an organized sense, but in a mental challenge of my, again, going back to environment, like the mental challenge of trying to use the environment that I had to challenge my skills to do things that were unique. So, you know, I know you've told your stories of being a kid and playing, but I'm curious to hear myself as well. What similar stories do you have of your development when you were young, and how did you have coaches growing up?
First of all, I love your story, and I've heard you say it many times, and I never get sick of hearing it because it's just a message that parents need to hear now. Because I see a lot of parents wasting time and money on just so many different trainers and skills coaches and mechanics coaches, especially at that young age. I'd say before kids hit the growth spurt, it's kind of unnecessary because they're not physically mature enough to do that advanced training, and emotionally they just want to be stimulated and have fun. And for you, like, you were stimulated by the fact that you had to throw the ball over the fence and like quickly get it, and you could do that all day. I'm sure you're doing it for hours,
Right.
whereas a 9-year old at like a 1 hour mechanics lesson, that doesn't land well for a full hour. I mean, the kid gets lost. They're not having fun unless you're a darn good skills coach and you can keep that kid engaged and make it super fun and stimulating. It's really hard. But yeah, I would say the same with my experience. I wrote about it in my first book, The Strong Female Athlete, and I opened the first chapter with how my parents had to like beg us to come inside. Like, we were out till it got dark out, and I grew up with a brother and playing with his friends, so I was surrounded by boys all the time and just wrestling and playing tackle football, capture the flag. And I look back and the skills I developed that translated to soccer are just, I mean, there's so many, from agility to getting comfortable with contact sports through football and tackling and wrestling. And we used to imitate like Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah.
Like, we would watch the WWE on TV and wrestle each other.
Right.
But I would step on the soccer field and not be afraid of being aggressive. And I think with something like aggressiveness, I get this question a lot from parents: how do I make my girl more aggressive and more confident? And I'm like, you gotta get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You gotta put her in a situation that is a higher intensity than competition and a higher stimulus that she's about to experience than the field. And I was talking to Carmen Bott about this the other day, and she's like, Erica, I do grappling and roughhousing with my athletes all the
That's
time.
awesome.
She's like, I don't care what sport they do, they need to get comfortable with contact and just being confident with their strength. And I would say just growing up playing with boys and playing all the games that we loved in the 90s just helped with so many things. And even just like my speed and agility and just awareness of what was around me, playing a lot of like racket sports, handball, basketball. Even though a soccer ball is at your feet, you do need hand eye coordination as a soccer player. And you need to have the ability to scan the field and keep your head on a swivel. There are so many kids now that just keep their heads down the whole time because they're so used to that in a soccer skills training session, and they just don't look around enough. They have no awareness. And I think that that play and that variety with different games and even handling different objects and ball sizes really helped with that awareness
Right.
and just ability to enter any environment. Because every soccer game, even though it's a single sport, that game day is always going to be a different environment, a different opponent, a different formation or style that the opposing team plays. So yeah, I just think that variety is so key for young kids. And I feel sometimes when I keep preaching this stuff, it just goes in one ear and out the other. And I'm like, that's fine, people. Like, we just talked about this. Like, I can't help everyone.
Right.
Like, you can take the advice, or you can continue to do what, your neighbors are doing and other parents, and working with a pro skills coach or a pro trainer. Like, go do that. But if you really want your kid to succeed physically, emotionally, and also mentally, they have to have that play and they have to have that variety young.
I love to talk about the physicality side of things. A good example, I think, that I told the other day, I forgot all about until it kind of came up in conversation. But when I was in college, I got to spend like a day around the football team. and they were in the weight room, and I got to go in the locker room and hang out for a bit.
Tell
And
everyone where you went to college. I don't think you mentioned it.
so I went to Ole Miss to start, and then
Minor detail with football.
I went to USF shortly after. This is at USF, but nonetheless, two very big Division One programs. Ole Miss a little bigger, but love USF as well. But I got to hang out and around the football players in the locker room, and just very unintentionally, like uh, from handshakes to hellos to grab that for me to just the way people interacted in the football landscape. People were in your personal space constantly, and they were like very physical with you constantly, whether it be just a joke and you said something funny, so they pushed you in the chest, and you're like, whoa, like what was that? These are big dudes. They're larger than life figures. Some of these guys are 6'7", 300 pounds, and yeah, they're massive individuals, and they have no regard for your personal space. And when you're around that for a minute, it kind of made me wake up to the fact that in the baseball locker room, like nobody was wrestling in the middle of the floor. Like nobody was like, we weren't all circled shoulder to shoulder, like joking about stuff and talking. When you were talking with each other, we were maybe 5 feet apart a lot of the time. Because in baseball, you have such a large space. Like you're not huddled on a sideline. You're not, yes, you have the dugout, but you have your personal space in the dugout as well. You'll notice baseball players, we all sit on a bucket or on the fence line. We all have our own little area or designated spots. Football is not that. Like you're sharing everybody's sweat, like you're just constantly sweaty. You're just on other people's sweat, like it's just gross, and you're just like living in this little ecosystem of just like physicality, and they have to have it because it's obviously what we do. But I took that back to the way that I looked at what I did, and I was like, I grew up in a world where I had my personal space. Now I'll take somebody else and put them in a world where they don't have that personal space. They're constantly on a football team. Those are two very different people that grow up and live their life. I have friends. You met one of them, played for the Bucks, and he's very successful in what he does. And again, larger than life figure, walks down the stairs, you know he's there. He comes up and says hello, and he says it looking you eye to eye, and he's well above all of us. He's 6'7", so but he looks you right in the eye, and he physically lets you know he's there. And I think there's something to be said about that and how we train athletes, especially at a young age. You talk about soccer, or you talk about tennis, or I talk about golf. Like I laugh about it in golf. Like, again, golfers are in their own space. Like to have somebody who's competitive, and to have somebody who's physical, and to have somebody who's, again, strong and a big dude, that's different than what you typically would envision a golfer being, right? And the same thing with baseball. Baseball is more physical, but in terms of like the competitive nature, you can lose that at times. So again, I think we're groomed by this makes a case, and part of why I brought this up. This makes a case for trying sports, and not just for the sake of I'm going to play this sport to be great at it and get a college scholarship, or to try to find out what sport you're best at, but simply from I need to get out of my own bubble, and I don't need to just be a baseball player, just need to be a golfer and embody who that is. You'll find it quickly. One more story there is I played golf competitively when I was a kid, and uh, I remember going to an event when I was 10 years old, and I identified myself as a baseball player. Like I didn't ever think about being really a full-time golfer. I loved baseball. And so when everybody started asking me, where do I train? Like, what do I do in terms of my training routine and all this stuff? I had no answers. And my dad and I made up this story that I train at Rips Academy, which is a little par three course that I practiced at. But one thing that I did notice was how reserved a lot of those kids were versus I was, again, even as a baseball player, I was very competitive. I wasn't whiny. Like I just took my punches and I just kept going. I wasn't a better golfer skill wise than they were, but I had different attributes that long term would have played out in my success had I actually focused on the skill and developed that skill. And so I just encourage parents, like, and players, I guess. I know you and I have talked a lot about this, like, sampling sports is not something that you do just to figure out what sport your kid is best at. Sampling sports gives your kid perspective and a competitive edge when you start talking about, whatever sport they choose to do when they specialize. Sampling sports can give your kid a perspective and a personality in some
Mhm.
cases as an athlete that they may not have gotten otherwise. Had I played football, maybe I'd been a bit more physical. Maybe I would have focused on other things in my development as an athlete. I don't know. I'm not sure. I played golf, baseball, and really a little bit of basketball, but that was kind of it for me. Very different types of. I didn't get the real heavy physical development. If you're a girl and you play flag football growing up, or you play, you're a guy and you play regular football and then you move to soccer, like, does that mean you're more physical on the field? Does that mean that you're faster? You're cut better? I don't know. I'm not sure. But there's different skills that are elicited from different sports for sure.
I Gosh, I can't imagine like having a childhood where I only just did soccer. That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And it's happening to a lot of people now.
Yeah.
Like I look back and I'm just so grateful. As you were talking there, I'm like, wow, I didn't just get the athleticism benefits of sampling all these different sports, but it was more the mental, social, and emotional aspect, just meeting new friends or having a different coaching perspective or different leaders you look up to and just learning skills for life and just being active and healthy. And I know last week I got you pickleball for Christmas. And it was so fun.
It
Like
was.
we went out and it was quite a workout, but I remember afterwards I was like, wow, that was like I felt like I got energy from that game even though it was hard and exhausting.
Yeah.
Like I got done, I'm like, wow, like we really needed that. And I think this goes into, your life when you retire from sports too. Like everyone needs to be able to get out of their comfort zone and just try new things and experience new activities and stay moving. I mean, that's more important for me. And then just the social and bonding aspect, whether it's with your family or your friends, it's just, I mean, there's so many benefits. And I look back, I love playing lacrosse.
Yeah.
Like I really enjoyed that sport, and I don't know, it's just a different stimulus than soccer, and I just thought it was cool that you can like catch a ball and just run it down the field and like it was like a lot easier than dribbling a soccer ball. So, and then you could just like whip shots and it was just like so liberating. But I didn't take it too seriously. I did play travel lacrosse and I made varsity lacrosse as a freshman, which I don't really talk about too much, but yeah, I still saw it as like a fun thing, but I was, still competitive with it. And I think if I didn't play soccer in college, maybe lacrosse would have happened, but I didn't play lacrosse thinking, "Oh, I might get a scholarship playing this sport."
Right.
It was more, "Oh, I just want to try this out because it's so fun."
Right.
So, yeah, I just look back, I'm like, I can't imagine like only playing soccer.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
You want to know? So I think this is actually interesting. I like your perspective on this.
Let me have some of my Stanley.
Ooh, Christmas gift. She got a Stanley.
I feel so basic.
um,
I can't keep up with the Tampa girls.
I'm going to ask you. So, I've noticed a problem with young athletes today on my side, and I don't think I've ever asked you this specifically, but the other day we were playing pickleball, and we created one line to start. We didn't have a net, right? We just started off with a line on the ground. And the problem with the line was that you were hitting shots just barely over the line and only about 6 inches off the ground. So me sprinting from the back line and trying to pick up the ball off the ground got me really frustrated. And I was like, this is stupid. That would have gone into a regular net. And we wanted to basically even out the playing field a bit. And so I went and found a rock and I drew on our street a massive square and then these other squares. And we put a gap where you had to hit the ball high enough in the air to carry it to the square, and that made the difference in the game, right? Like that made the game fun at that point. And then we said we were going to play to 5, and we played to 8, and we said no, we're going to play to 8, and we're going to play to 12, and sorry, not 8, we're going to play to 12, and so we kept going, and we kept playing more and more and more. What I noticed with kids today on my side is that adjustment of creating a new box and not just having the center line, and forcing the game to be more evened out to where it would be usable to creativity to establish a challenge of skill, I guess you could say. Um, I don't see kids have that today. I will give them, again, they walk into our space and they're learning about all sorts of different things from us, and they're trying to abide by the deliverables that we're asking them to, execute on, et cetera. But I don't see the creativity or the challenge. I'm going to throw this breaking ball here. I'm going to make it go there. Or I'm going to try to throw this breaking ball over that screen and make it land on this thing. What if we tried it this way? Hey, have you ever thought about trying it that way? You know what would be fun is if you did X. I don't see that at the younger levels. And I don't see that from kids who I know have sort of been in this travel wall space now repetitively. And personally, I think it's because, my opinion is it's because uh, parents are intervening, and starting to really drive the dialogue and the discussion of what you should be doing constantly to the kid, so the kid never has that creative free play. Are you seeing that on your side? Like, what comes to mind when you kind of hear that example, and what are you seeing with your athletes?
Yeah, I would say I've noticed it more and more just in the past few years, and I think you're right. It's more so the adults enabling it because, a 10-year-old kid doesn't know, so it's not their fault. So it's the environment that that kid's being put in and brought up in. And I think it comes back to our discussion about the mechanics coaches and these like skills trainers really young that are basically giving these kids all the answers in that session. I would be fine with these coaches at younger ages if it's in a group setting with a coach that sets up games to get these kids to think and problem solve on their own. And like you said, bring out that creativity.
Right.
And I'm even trying to do it now with my older girls. I think all ages can benefit from this because my older girls are about to enter into hard college environments and some of them might play pro one day. So I think they also need that problem solving continuously and that challenge. And one example that we're starting to do now is just having these crazy jumping competitions. I actually got this idea from Daniel at Jump Science, who's been on the podcast before. And he was like, look, you can have all your athletes continue to do like the vertical jump mat and you measure them every single week and they try and get higher, but they're adapting to that stimulus and their body is going to adjust to that and not really get that much better. So why not come at a jump from a different angle or do a twist and then jump or have them jump up and touch your gym ceiling?
Right.
And we've been doing that. Touch the pull-up bar, now jump up and touch the ceiling or touch the Christmas lights on the pull-up bar. Or last week at the field they had to do a 10-yard run up and like hit, I was holding a pole and each set I got higher and higher and we started off easy, so they're like, oh yeah, I got this, then went up, got a little harder, they're like, oh shoot, I gotta figure this out, and then I made it super high and a lot of them failed.
Right.
And I wanted them to fail.
Right.
And I know that sounds really messed up, but I want them to fail so that next time they figure out like what they need to do with their body to maybe get a better leap off the ground. And I think we need to put kids in these environments where they're solving movement problems. And I think team coaches need to do it. I think parents need to do it in the household, whether it's in the backyard or just getting out playing pickleball.
Right.
Yeah, I think there needs to be that challenge for these kids
Yeah.
because when they overcome that challenge after failing hundreds of times, then they develop confidence because they're like, wow, I finally did it and I'm capable.
Right.
I don't think kids get confidence by just us saying, you're enough.
Right.
We make fun of this all the time. The what do you call it? The toxic positivity. Yes. Or the love yourself culture. And look, like, yes, you should like love yourself, do the basics, like eat well, like sleep, please. But it just gets out of hand when we enable like, oh, you're so great and you don't need to work for it at all.
Right.
And I want people to fail sometimes so they can figure out a way how to overcome it and then get that confidence.
Right. I think like the pickleball example of you and I playing the other day, like what I've noticed is a lot of kids that would have been they drew a line and they had the rules of pickleball in their head, the official rules of pickleball. I don't know what pickleball rules are.
Oh, I don't, we didn't
You
look
don't
them
know. We
up.
didn't even look them
We
up.
just made them up.
We didn't play pickleball. We just had paddles and a ball. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't even about pickleball. It was just you can call it whatever you want to call it. We were just having fun in the street. And reality is when it became that the game wasn't fair because you're competitive and you're exploiting a loophole in the game, right? Because we had a single line and no net. I see that point is where a lot of kids would have quit. Instead of being creative and finding new ways to make the game happen and breaking the pickleball rules, whoever cares about the pickleball rules, we're just having fun. We're competing. We're enjoying ourselves. We're creating a skill. We're developing something unique. Like we're expressing, creativity, and we're expressing the desire to again compete. And I think a lot of kids, that's where I see them quit. You know, it's funny. I was on a golf trip a couple weeks ago. When I don't know when was that? Early December.
Yeah.
Okay, golf trip a couple weeks ago, and was playing golf with a couple of friends, and one of them was somebody I didn't know.
It's getting hot in here.
Yeah, it's getting hotter. One of the guys I didn't know, he is a very high level pitching coordinator for a very high level pitching director, sorry, for a very big name baseball team. And I showed him Jeremy Frisch on Twitter, and he was asking me about ways that we were creative, and we were talking about command and all these different development skills that we need to put together in our facility. And I said, dude, I've gotten so far away from like the like status quo teaching of like spins and all this technology stuff that we have in our facility. And I said, it's not that we don't use the technology. It's just to teach these skills. I realized like it's not about just constantly using the technology and trying to give this kid this technology or this data constantly on this feedback. I said, you know, sometimes, especially with our kind of 13 to 16-year-old athletes, like a lot of times it's just creating a new environment for them. It's trying to allow them to in some cases talk about mechanics like self-organize and create some of these things. And so I'm like, man, we've gotten away from a lot of the traditional stuff that we were doing, and instead of some of the popular stuff in baseball, I'm kind of gone to this other model of like, it looks like chaos at times, but it's just allowing kids to be creative. Like, here's what you need to do. I don't care how you do it. Give me your best effort at it, and let's see where we land. We'll modify it from there. And we've had a lot of success doing that. And I showed him Jeremy Frisch's account, and then we started, kind of riffing he and I on like, man, what if we could do this with, we're talking about high level guys like AAA, like big league, like AA guys, and teaching breaking pitches a certain way that he liked that we did, or focusing on command. We're not talking about just kids. Like we learn this way. We developed that when we were young, and then as we get older, like we've learned that way as well. So there's just a lot of questions around that I think that are important, and something that we need to potentially evaluate further. And something that you and I talk about a lot, which is how do we integrate today's world is like technology and so many everybody's very objective about their measures and their data and assessment and all these pieces, but how do we integrate technology, and then how do we best prescribe for athletes, not this orchestrated coaching environment. When I've written a blog on it that I can talk about if you want me to, but
Oh yeah, that was a good one. The genie one.
yeah,
Oh, it's so
I say
good.
we have coaches versus genies, and I think we're oftentimes pretending like we're solving the problems, or we're tricking the technology into telling us that we're doing a good job. But we're tricking ourselves to believe because the technology says we're doing a good job, we're doing a good job. And reality is, the technology is an aid, the data is an aid, it's a tool, it's a resource for us to understand progression and tracking progression. But the way that we teach skills, it's a lot of great coaching that's required. And you talk about failure and say all of that to wrap this back to failure. I wrote this blog a while back saying why lessons don't work. And I know that was a little triggering, maybe in the baseball industry, that I said that. But I think the lessons model is fundamentally broken. You cannot spend 30 pitches of the week with a coach and have this coach sit there and do something of relevance while you're actually competing in the skill. A lot of coaches and these and parents, this is maybe something for parents to take away from this as well, but I think we're so often fooled by the positive affirmation from the coach. And we think that because we spent this money, we went to this quote unquote expert, and they said our kid is doing a great job, that our kid is actually doing a great job, or that something happened. Oftentimes, nothing even happens. The coach just said they did a great job because they want you to come back and pay them money again. So if I'm a coach and I go week to week on my lessons with you and I see you once a week, well, I'm not going to tell you what you did today was horrible. I'm not going to push you to failure in a way that's not going to make you ever want to come back again. Um, you know, when we start talking about training and the true development of skills, there's you talk about jumping. For a long time in my life, I couldn't touch the rim when I was a kid on a basketball hoop. I think we've all done this, right? We all go up, we run up to a basketball hoop, we jump as high as we can, and we try to hit the net. And we move up to the middle of the net. Oh, I'm working my way up. And then we finally hit the rim. And then it's like, I wonder if I can dunk. And I don't know who chose 10 feet as a basketball hoop height, but it is like the great equalizer for especially men. Like it's like the great equalizer for men from athleticism standpoint. If you detrain in most cases, like guys won't dunk again. Like and so at the peak fitness of my life, I could dunk easy. Um, Today I don't think I could dunk. And so it's like if I want to go back and train again, like I don't need to get a jump mat. I don't need to track my jump height. Like if I wanted to jump higher, I don't even know that I'd focus on jumping. I would just go focus on dunking. And
That's what Daniel from Jump Science says.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reality of where parents go wrong on this, and then where parents misunderstand the coach's intentions, good or bad. Like you talked about pushing somebody to failure. Like it's important that we fail. And again, we lack creativity. Going back to this piece of we lack our athletes lacking creativity. I think our athletes often lack creativity because our coaches are afraid to push us to failure. You can create a game and it can be utterly horrible, and it can be utterly unobtainable. But that's okay, like because it's challenging you to try to do it, and that's just because you try to do it or you create this game, like you shouldn't always succeed in it. And I think, whether it be baseball, soccer, whatever, like I think that's a problem today. And I know it's something you've had a lot of guests talk about as well. So
I do want you to tell your snowboarding story because I felt so I've been snowboarding for like 8+ years. You snowboarded for the first time in our first year of dating, which was like 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. I was like, if I'm going to marry this guy, he needs to turn into a shredder because it's not gonna work. But just as a background, Casey has never seen snow in his whole life. And we go to Colorado, which is probably one of the hardest places to learn snowboarding. But you had never been, and I tried to give you basic pointers like toe side, heel side, but it's
I watched some YouTube videos.
yeah, he watched some YouTube videos on how to snowboard and he's like, I'm good. So yeah, we went to Keystone the first day and we go all the way up to the top and you probably spent 3 hours just teaching yourself.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Erica wanted me to. We went to Keystone, and if anybody's ever been there, there's a run called School Marm, and it's the longest.
I think it's like over 2 miles.
It's the longest run in like North America, and she wanted me to strap in. Mind you, I've never done this. I've got somebody else's snowboard and gear. I have no understanding of where I'm even going. I don't even know what I'm doing.
You haven't even strapped in.
I haven't even strapped. I don't even know how to get the thing on my feet yet. And she goes, "We're gonna go down the School Marm because it's a good beginners. It's a blue, but it's like a green."
And it's 2 miles long.
And I don't. She goes, "It's long, so it'll give you plenty of time to figure it out as we go." And so I went over to I got up there and she was really focused on me trying to go down school marm. And so I went over to the instructor that was standing there and I said, "Hey, I'm from Florida. I've seen snow, but I've never really seen this type of snow before. And it's my first time snowboarding. Where should I start?" And she pointed me over to the magic carpet and she goes, "Just go over there and figure it out." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." And so again, I hadn't strapped in yet, walked over there.
Well, she goes, "We're so glad you didn't
Yeah,
go
we're so
down."
glad you didn't do that.
She's like, "Stay over there. Don't go down school marm today."
Yeah,
And
so
I was like, "He'll be fine."
So we went over there and I didn't snowboard. I think I just did burpees for about like 3 hours straight, just up and down and up and down. And day one, I finally got going a little bit. Um, Erica was worried that I was going to quit, and I was exhausted. Day two, there was a little green run that was next to the magic carpet. And so I set a goal. I said, my goal is to get down the green run by day two. And so I finally started learning how to stop. I started dissecting sort of how I was doing it. And then by day two, I did the green a couple of times and got a little, at the end of the day, Erica kept talking about school marm and school marm and school marm's easy and you'll enjoy school marm. And so I rode my heels down school marm for 2 miles, my quads burning the whole way, but we got down school marm.
It was more
And
technical than I last remembered. So sorry. I thought it was easy. I hadn't been there in like 5 years.
um, but yeah, I self-taught myself how to snowboard, which is really not a huge feat. Eric was extremely helpful.
I
But
was your cheerleader. That was really it. I
yeah,
was like, "You got
you
it."
gave me some pointers. I watched her snowboard, but I think, uh, I guess your point to this is like, finding ways to learn and self-educating maybe in some of this, but
And you failed many times. Like,
right,
how many times you fall on that first day?
right.
I did it on my first day learning, and you really do want to give up.
Yeah,
I cried on my first time snowboarding.
I don't know that I was ready to give up because I wanted to go do it with you. Like I really wanted to snowboard with you, and I thought it would be fun. Like I knew I had to learn it, and it didn't look that challenging. Like I figured I could figure it out.
You're like, "Oh, I've done a longboard my whole life."
Yeah, like I've been on boards in the past, but I would say that uh, I think today's world and the equivalent to that in sport would be the thing that we didn't do was get me an instructor. Like, and I think it would have been helpful if I had gotten an instructor to some degree from the beginning. It probably would have sped up my learning process. But like, I think in doing it and having learned it, I fell in love with it, like snowboarding, because um,
We went to Beaver Creek on day 3, and
yeah,
I think the snow, the fresh powder, taught you how to turn comfortably.
right.
So the environment taught you.
My friend set up my board wrong as
Oh,
well,
yeah.
which was a big learning process. And I was obsessed with trying to figure it out after day one, day two. And he put my feet basically straight in line, which is like, you don't want to do that. You want to turn them out to like 45 degrees
Especially your height.
at my height. And so my other friend, when I took the board over to his house, it was in the back of our car. We went and had dinner with him, and I was telling him, I'm like, man, I can go heel side great. And so I'm at this point, I'm obsessed with figuring it out. Right? I fell in love with trying to figure it out and do it. I wanted to do it so bad, and so I'm like, man, like I'm obsessed. I feel like every time I go toe side, it's where I wipe out. I just can't figure out toe side. He's like, oh, that's strange. Like, I found toe side a lot easier to figure out than heel side. And I was like, no, no, heel side's super easy for me. Just can't get toe side. He's, let me look at your board. So I brought the board in, and he's like, oh, he's like, this is impossible for your size. And so he fixed my feet. And then the next year I bought my snowboard. Or so it was the
Or we did
third year,
Breckenridge and
third
Vale,
year.
and then you started to get it
Yeah,
there, and then you bought your snowboard before our honeymoon,
right.
which was snowboarding.
Yeah, we went snowboarding for a
Yeah,
honeymoon.
we went to Montana.
But I think again, there's like that obsession with trying to figure it out, and there's that longer duration, like, um, it spurred me to go watch more YouTube videos. It spurred me to go try to get fit for my own snowboard because I wanted to be better. Like, talk about kids and you start talking about sport specifically and you start learning like, okay, what's going to make this kid want to do this for the long term? I can promise you it's probably not you sticking this kid with a coach privately and forcing this kid to do a lesson right out of the gate. Like, let them experience and explore, and don't mark it as good or bad. Don't talk about how good or bad your kid is. Don't label them as something they aren't or are. Like, recognize that, like, look, I'm 33 years old and I'm not the world's best snowboarder. I don't have aspirations to be the world's best snowboarder. I'm not going to go down. We were in Big Sky, and I looked up at the summit. And I'm like, never going to happen. Like, not going to do that. But I enjoy snowboarding, and it's an activity. We start talking about sports. Most people aren't ever going to go to the summit of their sport, like in the reality of it. But to do it as an activity for life, or to take the skills away from it for life, I think there's a lot to be learned there. And I think the sort of tenacity to go figure out something like snowboard comes from a lot of my sport background. I know I'm not good at it right now, but I believe in my skills enough and my abilities enough to like be a good athlete and to do things that are fun. And I think everybody wants that, right? Like it's important.
I'd say you're better than me now.
No shot.
You were doing jumps in Montana.
Yeah, I wasn't landing jumps, so you were landing jumps. You're
Yeah,
good at
but
jumps.
that's like the snowboarding journey. It's like you get comfortable on the board, you learn, then you learn how to turn, then you go down like the steeper trails, then you're like, okay, I want to jump now, and you're at that point like I want to jump.
Yeah,
And then I feel the next point for you is going down the summit and jumping out like a helicopter,
I don't think so.
like Mark.
No thanks. No thanks. I do have a question for you on talking about, and last question I'll ask.
You're asking me questions?
I'm asking you a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I never get asked questions on my podcast.
Notice this setup, like we're a perfect. It's supposed to be like a you ask me questions, I ask you questions thing.
Okay.
Okay. All right. um, when you look back over your career in strength and conditioning and helping female athletes, what is something that you started off with in your career having a expectation or a perception of that is completely changed today in what you do today? So you sort of had expectations of your athletes or of the system or of a sport or whatever. You had some sort of preconceived notion of what you were getting into, and then you're actually in it today at a high level. What was the thing that changed?
I mean, a lot of things, but I think the big thing now is I'm trying to really educate people on what female empowerment means,
It's great.
because I think this is where it gets a little blurry, because you have people, and I used to be guilty of this too when I was a young strength coach. You have people blaming female anatomy, female hormones on the injury risk and declines in performance, but I don't think that's an empowering message. I think that's a very disempowering message. And I think for me, with this platform now, it's like, okay, well, let's accept that we are females. Let's accept that some of us have wider hips than males. Let's accept that we have less testosterone or we put on muscle a little bit slower. Let's accept that we have menstrual cycles, but let's control what we can. And that's why I really wrote Female Athlete High Performance, the second book. And it's really about chasing performance first and chasing health first, too. And telling female athletes, you need to be doing all these things: strength training, workload management, recovery, proper nutrition, because that's what is in your most control. And I think that's true female empowerment, when we move away from this victim mindset. Oh, I'm a female and life is way harder for me. Well, let me tell you, I can think of a lot of hard things that men go through too.
Right.
And I'm not going to go there on this episode, but and it's crazy because I've been called a misogynist for saying that, but But I really think people should ask the question, well, am I empowering female athletes or am I disempowering them? And I think when I was a young strength coach, I had good intentions, but I was actually disempowering them
Yeah.
with a lot of this messaging and not really letting them know that they can control so many things in their performance and their health as well. So I think that's been the biggest change for me. I just want less of that victim mindset and more of that victor's mindset.
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Bella agrees.
And yeah, she did. Bella stood up. She's like, I'm in for this
Man, I
female
love it.
empowerment.
Female empowerment.
Casey's outnumbered with females in the household. Well, and I also changed my perspective as a female coach too, because when I started in this industry, I did kind of play the victim. And I did always say, well, I'm in a male dominated industry and it's really hard for me. And I kept telling myself that story. But looking back, I don't think it was true because I also look at how many opportunities I got because I'm female.
Right.
And I recognize that and I'm grateful for that. I mean, even the conference I spoke at this past August in Green Bay, Wisconsin, I got chosen because I'm a woman.
Right.
And I'm okay with that.
Right.
It was an all female conference. It was for a great cause. It was all female athletes there. Like, it was amazing. And I don't want to sit here and be this female coach that's like, well, I'm just going to complain about everything because I'm a woman. I don't think that's setting a good example to young female athletes in the next generation,
Right.
especially if they want to get into sports or own a business or work in any high performing job. You can't go in with that mindset that it's a female thing. I don't think that's female empowerment. That's what's really changed for me.
Would you say that that's your takeaway for your lesson or your learning in that? Would you say that's your takeaway for your today athletes, the girls who train?
100%.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. It frustrates me. It frustrates me seeing people complain.
Yeah.
And it's like, go get it.
Love it.
Yeah, go get it. Do what you can control. And yeah, there's going to be some things that aren't in your control, but just try your best. And you're going to fail and you're probably going to get a lot of no's. I've gotten a lot of no's too. I haven't been invited to every conference to speak, and it's fine. Like, it's okay. Like, it'll work out.
I
And I'm
think it's
grateful for what's happened and the opportunities I've gotten. I was offered a pro job to work in pro soccer because I'm female.
right.
And honestly, I wasn't really qualified to get that job because I've never worked with pros. I only work with youth.
Right.
And that's kind of messed up because I'm sure there were a lot of other people, men included, who were more qualified than me who had pro experience, but they called me because I'm a female. And I'm like, well, I can't complain about that.
Right.
I got that opportunity even though I actually wasn't qualified.
Right.
So, yeah, it's interesting. I won't share the full part of that story, but I just think we need to empower all females
Yeah. I
and
think
stop
it's
being victims.
because you have a platform. In some cases, you're female and you have a platform. People know who you are, and they champion the female. And I think in men today are also there's a model, right? And I hear it a lot with talking to people. See some of the stuff that we built with KP, and it's the same thing where you guys are really killing it, and I'm like, little do you know, like
Yeah.
it's not as easy, and it looks good from the outside, social media and all of that. But intentionally, it looks good from the outside, right? Once you get in the inside and you really go to the day to day, like it's work, it's hard, and nothing was handed to us. Like we as a staff, like we've worked really hard to get there. But I do know guys that they also like will play the victim and say, I didn't get this opportunity because, or I didn't get this opportunity. Like, well, go be good enough where somebody can't deny you the opportunity. How about that? Like, just
Yeah.
be so good at what you do that
Yeah.
people can't deny you the opportunity to have that platform. And if they're not going to let you use their platform, then go build your own. Like, and simple as that. And I think in some cases, like, it's interesting to hear you talk about um, the empowered female athlete, like watching you do this podcast and watching you do your work daily and write your books. Like when we met, you started writing a book within the first 6 months, I think, of when we met. We were doing coffee shop dates, and
Mhm.
you were sitting there writing away, and I was blown away by how much you had, and it was just constant typing. And I was like, where's all this coming from? Like you had a message you wanted to get out, and I was a little skeptical, I think, at first about self-publishing and things like that you were going through in terms of developing that book. And you're like, I got this, I'm doing it. And I'm like, that's inspiring, like that's empowering, like, and how many girls would have taken the opportunity to have a vision, execute on that vision, deliver that vision? How many guys would have done the same? Like, I know a ton of people say, I want to write a book and never follow through with it. I mean, can't tell you how many people in my life have said I wanted to write a book and never followed through on it. Like, that's a huge deal. And so I think, yeah, it's I'm impressed by. I asked that question. I thought about that question beforehand because we were talking about topics and things that we might want to talk about. I don't think we covered any of the topics we originally talked about, by the way. We talked about all new stuff on a different riff. It's fine. But I think it's interesting to me, and the thing that keeps our dialogue going on almost a daily is we're constantly evolving and learning life lessons and learning lessons within our business, and how our business attached to our life and how our life attaches to our business. And we're constantly going back and forth. And then to see disseminating those messages and getting people to, come on here and talk at a high level, like it's very encouraging. It's very cool. But I think I just, um, I think if you ask other people what your life lessons would have been, it would have been talking about ACL injuries, or it would have been talking about the menstrual cycle, or it would have been, well, I thought it was this, and but then it became that. And I think if you talk to a lot of coaches, their perspective is this very scientific, very high level, very objective thing. And I love that you come back to your career may have started there at one time where it was all about knowledge. It was all about, I don't believe knees need to do this, knees need to be trained this way, or whatever. But now it's back to no, like I want to serve, and I want to teach people the importance of service. I want to empower female athletes to serve others and to grow and to become their own strong female athlete. I think that's amazing. So I brought it up because I was curious, but uh, I guess I'm just impressed, and uh, it's inspiring to me to see that you are still pushing that service message, and that's the main focus. I know the brand change and the book and all this other stuff that you're doing is around that now, and so I'm proud of you. It's awesome.
Thank you. You helped me a lot.
I try.
I think that's also another important thing to say is I thought that just coming back to the female thing, I thought being a strong female was just being this independent, self-made. No one's self-made. Like, I mean, there are so many people along the way that have helped me and mentored me. And even just now with just this podcast, I mean, you helped me build this stupid microphone. You helped me build this studio. We built it during Hurricane Milton when we had nothing else to do. And you taught me how to use cameras and edit. And yeah, I think I'd be lying to say, like, I did all this by myself. I'm a strong female. It's like, no, like, it's okay to admit you had help and you had a network of people who were excited for you and who supported you and who inspired you. And we always joke that, what do we say about hard work?
You never know what hard work looks like until you meet somebody who works hard.
Yeah. And you were that person. Like, I thought I worked hard, but you actually work hard. Because, like, yeah, I don't know, you think, like, just doing the bare minimum is, "Oh, I'm putting in my hours, I'm getting stuff done," but then when you meet someone else who's, like, actually, like, so focused on what they're building, you're like, "Oh, man, I don't do anything."
I like the I like the takeaway. Um, we can end it on here. I think Bella's falling asleep on us again.
Our eyes are
Um,
closed. No,
Uh,
we work hard to support Bella's life.
that's it. Um, but I think we talk about team all the time, you and I think that's for your athletes, for your coaches, like, um, team doesn't have to be your employees. Team doesn't have to be your actual team. Team can be your family.
Yeah.
Team can be, the friend that works down the street who has a kind of cool business that helps your business or just gives you advice. Like, we have so many good teammates that are in our network that we share and that we kind of lean into. And you and I were a great team. And I think team, for a key takeaway here, like you want to serve somebody, you want to grow somebody, like you need somebody to hold you in check and make sure that there are checks and balances in your daily. um, you talk about hard work and like, I see you working hard and inspires me, and apparently you see me working hard and inspires you. um,
I rest hard too.
you rest hard too.
I really do.
You rest really
I
hard.
get to bed by 8 or 9.
um, but I guess I would say like the takeaway to all of that is, I'd pose the question to athletes out there, who is your team? And your evolution, the evolution of where you started to a podcast rebrand. I remember a couple years ago when we started dating, I asked you the question like, well, do you just do soccer? And you're like, no, I do female athletes. And I go, well, your website's like all soccer. And you're like, yeah, but like, I know I need to like, and then seeing you go through that evolution of like, yeah, you're right. Like, not that I'm right. Like you saw it too. Like, and you already knew, like, I need to do something about that. I need to take action, and I want to really open this up to reflect what it's become. It's becoming something new, and I need to acknowledge that and evolve in that. And so with the rebrand and with these other things, like I think it's important for those that are listening, coaches, kids, parents, whatever, like help parents. If you're a parent, like help your kid define their team. Like I talk about that a lot, right? Like at KP we have our staff, and I always talk about being the third party. Like I want to be there in the room when your kid's making decisions around their future for baseball. Like I don't want that kid to solely make I'm going to go to this camp, I'm going to go to that camp, I'm going to go no, we're here, we're here to help. Like we've been through it. Like lean into our expertise. Like please let us be involved in that conversation. It means more time, it means more work for me, means more work for our staff, but like it's an important conversation to have, and it's going to set our athletes up in the right direction. If you're a coach and you're working hard hours, working on the job, we talk about the volunteer coach already, like, and you're trying to learn, you're trying to grow, well, make sure you're surrounding yourself with other good coaches. You're challenging yourself in thought. Reach out to people and DM on social media and find new ways to engage and think differently. Don't just attack people on social media for their beliefs or their thought processes. Understand why. Ask hard questions. Like, evaluate. If you're a player out there, look, when things get tough, like who do you turn to? Like, you and I talked about mental coaches or mental strength, and where does that fall into the line of performance training, and how much do we lean into that? We talk about skills coaches and skills training, and like, well, how much of that do you need? And we start to talk about these different segments. Well, if I'm a player and I only have one coach, but I have my family that's helping me develop. If I have another person that lives down the street that played soccer at a high level, and I want to be at that high level one day, like if I'm an athlete, like is that person part of my team or are they not? Like, do they provide me good insight or do they not? And does that person keep me on track or do they not? It might just be if you go to church, for example, like, you might have a youth pastor or somebody that's like, really involved in your life. Like, how does that person play into your long-term development as a athlete? Like that person's going to help shape you and make you the person you are. Like they're part of your team, whether they have direct or indirect effect on your career. Like they're part of your team. So, um, you know, I guess this is kind of cool to talk about, like to come on and do this with you. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me. Uh,
Anytime.
but I think it's bigger picture, like maybe some insight to those that are watching around your team and sort of what's going on in the background, and the other guests that you have on. Oftentimes, some of them are part of your team as well, which has been really cool to see. So, yeah, it's special, and um, trying to make sure that we keep that team up and keep things evolving and keep new things going. And you're doing awesome with that. So,
Thank you for coming on.
of course, time to watch football.
Yeah, time for Sunday football. Of course, we're podcasting on a Sunday or one day. All right.
Yeah, we missed the first half of the Bucks. That's all right. We're gonna go see them win a game. And Bella's asleep. So
Yeah.
Bella's, you wanna say hi?
She's
Bella, you wanna say hi?
it's so funny because during my podcast she doesn't have a peep, but then when you're in a meeting,
I
she
know.
starts
She comes in
howling and
noise.
whining. Well, thank you guys for tuning in and like the video if you want Casey to come back on. No pressure. So I'll see you guys on the next episode of the Strong Female Athlete podcast.